Japanese role-playing games are something that on the surface, I never thought I'd have an interest in. Superficially, from material I had seen, I found the character designs across this genre off-putting, and the dub voice acting questionable at best. Now, I have always been a fan of Western RPGs and sandboxes. I have fond memories of the first time I reached Winterhold, or discovered Revan's true nature. The concept of moulding your own character, from a blank slate into a mighty hero or fallen angel, was greatly appealing to the creative in me. And games like The Witcher 3 built on this by allowing me to make genuine gaming decisions that actually mattered and reshaped the world I was crafting. I didn't on the surface see the same appeal in JRPGs. Whilst often it seemed like your character was a blank slate, but customization and self-lore crafting was not as prominent, and the worlds did not seem as open and malleable as I had become accustomed to as a gamer. At a time, before I had become one with this genre, I saw all of these elements as negative. What I didn't realise was that I had greatly judged a whole library based on one cover. JRPGs have changed my outlook on gaming. They have opened my mind up to new possibilities, new tropes, and in many ways captured the gaming awe that I have seldom felt since the PlayStation 2's heyday. Today I want to share with you my adoration for this amazing genre. I want to write an honest and open account of how my perspective towards JRPGs has changed since playing a number of diverse titles. Therefore, this critique will cover a number of different games. However, I will not discuss or show any elements I consider spoiler, and instead, I will talk about the narrative, gameplay and design from a broad perspective across the aforementioned games. This is to say, I will not talk about details of any specific game, but rather the genre and how it is reflected across the games featured. This will be the first edition of what I plan to be a series of essay-style critiques of this genre, and so I'm open to feedback on what other areas should be covered. Okay, with that out of the way, this video will be divided into the following sections. And now, without any further intermissions, let's take a look at the JRPG genre. As I mentioned during the introduction, one of the initial reasons as to why I was not so inclined to play JRPGs was because of the style of design linked to this genre. Now don't get me wrong, the designs are not universally the same across the board. However, I think it is fair to say that there is a certain style that distinguishes JRPGs from other RPG games. The fact is, JRPGs are not shy in showing that they have a certain style, a style not rooted in realism or sophistication, but rather in a confidence that it knows exactly what it is, but simultaneously doesn't bound itself to any particular rules of realism. This is where one of my initial reservations about JRPGs sprung. In the West, our media, our gaming, often prides itself on this almost oxymoronic fantasy realism. Games like The Witcher and Skyrim are by nature fantasy games, but yet they are also grounded in themes that parallel our world, our history. The Witcher has monsters, but is more concerned about exploring the perception of what a monster is. The fantasy elements of these games and the character designs are used to contrast and examine themes, very human themes, such as the harmfulness of the human race. A lot of the environmental and character designs help categorise these games as medieval just as much as fantasy. Whereas in the JRPGs I have experienced, the designs are abstract and outlandish. Where Western RPGs aim to immerse players in a realistic fantasy world, JRPGs do not dare concern themselves with this, at least in my experience. Due to the conditioning I've received from Western games, I was initially put off by this, and for a while, I held off on playing some truly fantastic games due to the look of the world and characters. Take Xenoblade Chronicles 2 for example. The designs at first glance are certainly memorable, and were for me just silly, really. Rex's clunky outfit, Nia's ears, and well, Tora just didn't resonate with me. It looked like some huge anime fanfiction buff had conned his way to a lead game designer and was righteous in not swaying from his daydream designs. I mean, Pyro's design is just, well, I'm sure I don't need to elaborate. The fact is, some of these designs are just plain right pandering, and are horniness incarnate, but there is also a certain charm that I learned to appreciate over time. The problem was, I was going into these games with a Western lens, transfixed on realism and authenticity, with little understanding or appreciation for what the games were focused on. Identity is a very important part of JRPGs, and the character designs here are used to very brazenly illustrate themes and groups. The Nippon characters in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, for example, are quickly characterised by their barrel designs, vocal inflections, and general word-emitting dialect. Listen to this interaction, and you'll quickly be able to make certain judgments about the characters featured.
This just back door. Front entrance over there.
Makes sense. Whoa! Is that the cloud sea down there? We're so high up.
Nice view, eh? Tora likes to just sit and watch cloud sea sometimes.
You have a wonderful home.
Anyway, Rex.
Rex?
Rex. Tora, explain other reason I help you. You see, Tora always wanted to make driver friends.
Ah, interested in drivers, are you?
But of course. Tora think it's amazing how Driver and Blade join spirits together to make big power. Tora really want to be sidekick of Rex.
You know my name is just Rex, right? One Rex, not two.
What is point?
Well, nothing, I guess. It just sounds a bit different from what I'm used to.
Double name just showed Tora's respect. Respect for great driver. Rex should be proud.
I'm not sure I've earned all that yet. Oh, all right. You can call me Rex if it makes you happy. But instead of all this sidekick stuff, can't we just be friends?
Really? Tora will be friend of Rex? Hooray!
What a funny little guy. Hey!
The approach is different and alien to those who are used to Western games, but it's effective in characterising different groups. Naturally, the issue is that by choosing to design your characters in such a way, you are running risk of gamers forming negative stereotypes of your game before even playing it, which I unfortunately did. When designs so prominent and out there, it can detract from the themes being presented. However, having sat down to play a number of different JRPGs that could fit this description, I must stress this. Please don't, no matter how tempting, develop premature beliefs about the games. Let them surprise you like they did me. By choosing such prominent, such outrageous designs, JRPGs excel in character and world building. In the games that I have experienced, every location feels unique, and its identity is evident in every quantifiable aspect of it. The residents, the shops, and even sometimes the quests are developed from a consistent design choice. A town such as Gormott in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has a clear identity. From quests and NPCs, I know, for example, that the lumber industry is an important part of the town's ecosystem. Now look, I know it sounds like I picked the most mundane choice possible, but this is important and reflects an element where I feel JRPGs truly excel. Compare Gormott to say any of the towns in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and that point about identity is very evident. In Odyssey, which is an RPG, let's be real here, nearly all the towns feel copy and pasted and completely the same, and there is a lack of true identity. Whereas in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, there is clear traits of each element of the world, which can be credited to the design choice. It's the same thing for dungeons in Skyrim, which again feel very similar and copy and pasted. Whereas in Tales of Vesperia, the dungeons feel different, as if they were from different areas of the world. Amazing! Now look, I'm not saying that Western RPGs are less creative or diverse in their locale. The Witcher 3 shows otherwise. The point here is that even though the eccentric game design I've found in JRPGs is initially distracting to say the least, there are benefits to be found in choosing to be so brazen. There is more freedom with world building and character building, where say The Witcher excels with its dialogue in developing its world, characters and dynamics. JRPGs can utilise the creative and literal palette to cover these themes more visually. Another example that shows the effectiveness of JRPG character design was found in a quest in Xenoblade 2, specifically in a piece of essentially inconsequential dialogue, where an NPC asked me who I thought was the culprit for a crime. Presented here was not an individual, but rather 3 species, and I immediately had the correct suspicion due to the effectiveness of the different design choices amongst the 3 groups, which gave strong identity and characteristics to each group. I think all of these design efforts go into making these games feel memorable and different. Dragon Quest XI stylistically looks very, very different from Xenoblade 2. Tales of Vesperia and Tokyo Xanadu don't even look like they're from the same genre. Yet across the board, all of these games have a strong, distinguished identity. And this is important, as each design, although eccentric, does serve a purpose, and isn't as arbitrarily absurd as I first thought. We as gamers all have our own preferences when it comes to a game's length. Some of us prefer to blitz through title after title so as to cultivate a completionist identity, whilst others prefer to fully immerse themselves into the game's world segmented part of their everyday life to live this other life within the gaming universe. Uncharted 4, which I recently reviewed, shameless plug there, provides the former with a great, short but sweet tale that acts as an extended movie. Now, on the other hand, JRPGs are more like that anime anthology that you are daunted by, the Gintamas and Dragon Ball Zs of the world, who demand a cult-like devotion to complete their games. Okay, I may have exaggerated that a tad. The point I'm teetering around is that JRPGs are long, very long, in my experience. Now, this isn't the issue. Heck, Western RPGs equally rival and sometimes extend this length. No, the problem with JRPGs is that there is a certain unspoken rule that I believe exists within them, a contract that the player must unknowingly agree to when they sign up for their next journey. The 10-hour rule. The 10-hour rule is, as mentioned, an obligation that many players have to adhere to when playing a JRPG. Don't worry, it's not a literal contract. It is the rule that you need to give a game at least 10 hours before you make an affirmative decision or judgment about it. Now, this is of course for some people quite an issue. To ask that you commit the length of the average Uncharted game or 2 Resident Evils, okay maybe even 3 Resident Evils, to see the game in its true form is a non-negotiable for a lot of people on that 9 to 5 grind. Time is precious, and the sheer thought of realising you wasted 10, 15, even 20 hours on a game purely on expectation and hope is very frustrating. But Michael J.H., couldn't you say the same thing about Western RPGs? Why are you singling JRPGs out so badly? Glad you asked, an identified voice that sounds strangely similar to mine. You see, the difference between the genres, damn, back at it again with the comparisons, is that for example, in Skyrim, the core gameplay mechanics and general gameplay loop is defined within the first 10 hours. Combat is clear, and the variables that do change are some skill levels and the weapons you hold. Similarly, in The Witcher 3, Geralt already has certain signs and his 2 swords at the start. Of course, he'll go on to unlock better weapons, better mutations and gear, but the gameplay doesn't go through any sort of metamorphosis. Whereas, again, in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the game takes a lot longer to introduce its true gameplay. There is a joke in the community about tutorials all the way up to endgame, which is absurd and strangely commendable at the same time. The problem with this is that the mechanics coming in really do enhance the gameplay, and at the start, and for quite a while after, the gameplay feels very stripped down, to the point for some where it might be considered downright bad. In my opinion, as a game designer, you never want to have to resort to fans pleading with prospective players that it gets better. Trust me, by 20 hours in to my playthrough, everything clicked. This indirect gatekeeping is a detriment that I know for me would have put me off. I was fortunate that I did heavily consult forums and reviews before playing the game, so I was aware how much better it gets, which oh my goodness it does. Others won't have the same time to do the research that I did. I really want to stress this point and further examine why this is an issue. I am certainly not saying that introducing mechanics as the game goes on is a bad thing. In fact, progression can feel very rewarding and give us that dopamine boost that helps keep us hooked. The problem is that the initial core gameplay should be engaging enough to demand further player investment. It shouldn't feel like systems have been hidden away. You should be able to see where progression is going, with a few surprises on the way as a reward for your time investment. Again, I feel that sometimes this genre can miss the mark here. In my opinion, Tales of Vesperia's initial combat feels clunky and just not fun. That should never be the case. Yes, it could be a bit basic, but I shouldn't be bored after my first combat sequence. It is okay to be underpowered and lack certain skills for narrative reasons, but it is also important to pace the progression with consideration for the player's time. I just want to point out that I actually love JRPG combat, but again, the 10-hour rule applies. Now inherently, this will always be a bit of an issue for this genre, as having a party system mechanic is symptomatic of a lot of these problems. Often, you'll start the game with just one character, such as in Dragon Quest XI, and you'll go on to have up to 5, 6, maybe even more party members. This issue comes with the territory, and if narratively it makes more sense to only have a party of 1 or 2 at the start of the game, so be it. But again, it is another point to consider. Speaking of narrative, the same rule applies. Now, due to JRPGs typically being longer, the narrative is also going to likely suffer from this rule, as opposed to other games. Looking at a different game in Tokyo Xanadu, bad boys, what you gonna say, let's not do that, we can see the issue affects the narrative as well. The game for quite a few chapters, up until around the midpoint, felt very generic, and seemed like a Persona-like cash grab. The characters were tropey, but not particularly interesting, and the story was nothing special. But then, suddenly, the writing felt more crisp. The story became a lot more engaging, and the characters finally came out of the anime generator factory into their own right. Problem was, I'd already put in roughly 20 hours. At the 10-hour mark, this game held a very different impression in my mind, and it would have been a huge disservice, in hindsight, to have stopped playing. But I shouldn't have to go through this. It is like when someone kept asking me to give Persons of Interest a chance. Trust me, it gets better after one season. But season 1 is 23 40-minute long episodes, or 15 hours. Naturally, I'd be more inclined to watch a series that is good from the start. In the same sense, if I'm paying for a game and expecting a certain level of narrative standard, that should be at least somewhat discernible in the first 10 hours. It is okay if it's slower, but it shouldn't suddenly have to morph into an engaging story. Across any media, this should not be a thing. Again, JRPGs naturally being longer accentuates this issue. However, trust me, if you can power through some padded out tedium at the beginning, the JRPG genre houses some of the most rewarding games. Finally forming your final party is one of the ways in which the journey is encapsulated, and strong character dynamics will carry you through to the end. And also, super awesome party combo attacks are just the best, aren't they? So, how can JRPGs overcome this 10-hour rule issue without fundamentally changing how the game works? I think that scope is an important part of rectifying this issue, both from a narrative and gameplay standpoint. I'd liken the issue to trying to teach a child to program. You don't just sit there and make them code endlessly until the project is done. For 99% of children, this will not work. The lack of instant or at least semi-regular gratification will ultimately lead to them losing interest. In the same sense, when introducing a newbie into the world of JRPGs, the game, in my opinion, needs to be designed with regular gratification in mind. For the child, rewarding them at each little milestone of a game they can play, and therefore reminding them of the scope to what they are learning, is a viable solution. For a gamer, whose attention span I hope is a little bit better than a child, a method I propose is actually found in Tokyo Xanadu. In between chapters, the game lets you play a side story of sorts, which changes the narrative and freshens up the gameplay dynamic by switching point of view. And with gameplay, the characters you play as are at a higher level, having an expanded moveset which touches on abilities the core character doesn't have yet. I feel this was effective insofar as reminding me of the scope of the gameplay, whilst also helping keep the narrative from getting stale or drawn out. Padding out the slower sections, both story and gameplay wise, with distinct side sections, greatly helped get me through the 20 or so hour slog. I think this is definitely one way which mitigates having to change the narrative in such a way as to make the gameplay more engaging, whilst also helping demonstrate to the players that the gameplay and story will continually improve. For a child, programming and creating a game is a real mountain that most won't be inclined to climb alone. They need help along the way. JRPGs are a mountain of gameplay mechanics, tropes and multiple narrative threads. There are many obstacles along the way, but trust me when I tell you that once you reach the summit, you will realise that it was definitely worth it. Tropes, a significant or recurrent theme, a motif. Every form of artwork, writing, film and gaming all has its own tropes. Tropes, after all, are an important part in helping the audience build familiarity and understanding. I mentioned in part 1 that identity is a very important aspect of JRPGs, and tropes play a key role in helping foreground ideas, for better or worse. I think it's fair to say that JRPGs have a certain style that parallels anime, and as such there are also certain tropes that cross over. The problem is that, due to the aforementioned style, some of these tropes are, let's not sugarcoat it, they can be incredibly annoying, distracting and at times even embarrassing, to the point where you wouldn't want to be walked in on playing some of these games. Now, every form of media relies on recurring motifs, and it is an important building block for design, but I feel that JRPGs often lean too far into these tropes, creating archetypal characters, with certain recurring archetypes being so goddamn annoying. I'm not quite sure who decreed that there had to be a child or childlike character in pretty much every one of these games, but to whoever you are, I just want to say, you have no concern for my hearing, you cruel, callous being. It is bad enough that these characters exist, let alone the fact that they are then co-signed to be a member of your party. I can vividly recall the relief and adulation when I unlocked my 4th party member in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and could finally remove Tora and save my ears from the cacophony of annoying sounds he makes. Wow, I sound like such a grumpy old man. Nevertheless, tropes exist in abundance in JRPGs, and that is something I accept. Tropes are not inherently a bad thing. The Lovable Rogue, for example, is a trope that across many forms of media is well received. Han Solo, Stone Cold Steve Austin and Charlie Sheen, okay, maybe not Charlie Sheen. Tropes, as mentioned, service for narrative by aiding players in identifying character archetypes, and therefore telling you about their personalities, and then providing the writer with the opportunity to either adhere to or subvert these tropes, which can create some interesting narrative twists. The problem with JRPGs is that the tropes used within the party system seem to be similar across different games. How many times is the main character a good-natured teenager who prides friendship above all? Rex, Adol, Eleven, I could go on. The games also love having child characters, as I mentioned earlier. Patty and Tails, Tora in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Rikota and Ise, to name a few. More often than not, these characters are there to provide a comic relief of sorts, but especially in Tora's case, are just straight up irritating. I would understand if these games generally were more childlike, and thus these characters felt relevant, but in my experience, they contrast heavily with more sophisticated stories and mature themes, and almost seem like they exist to appeal to children. Consequently, they feel like a microcosm of childish themes that exist to appeal to a wider audience, rather than bearing any sort of necessity to the narrative. Another glaring trope found is within the designs of a lot of the female characters. As a case study, we'll use Pyra from Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Take a quick look at her. Okay, I'll give you a few moments. You still with me? One part of her design is quite, shall we say, prominent. She's a redhead. I kid. The fact is, this design feels like it came from 13-year-old me's dreams after watching too much anime before bed. Her design feels softcore, and in what is a strong narrative feels quite amateur in its thought. Now, this may come down to cultural differences, but again, in my opinion, design such as the one here, and with it the over-sexualization of female characters, is just nauseating. General sexualization of these characters reeks of childish humour, and if you aren't quite with me yet, I'll let this quick scene play out.
Tora will now introduce Assistant to help teach Essence of Maidiness.
How may I be of service, Mr. Rex, sir?
Poppy?
What is this, Tora? Some kind of malfunction?
Do not worry. This just Rex-focused blushy crushy maximization mode. Have a good day salvaging, Mr. Rex, sir.
Mr. Rex. Sir.
So, this is blushy crushy?
Okay, Pyra, copy what Poppy say.
I'll touch on one more trope I found problematic with JRPGs, and that is the repetitiveness of its lead characters. Broadly speaking, a JRPG lead can typically be classified as one of two archetypes. Archetype 1, a silent, blank slate, player as the hero type character. Or Archetype 2, a young, naively optimistic lead who believes the power of friendship can resolve any issue they may face. Oh, to be young again. The latter I don't necessarily find as too much of an issue, when counterbalanced with characters who can help broaden the main character's perspective. Rex, for many, is quite polarising in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but his point of view is consistently challenged by the more pragmatic realist Nia, or the sage-old Titan wisdom of Gramps. This helps add sufficient development for a lead who could be seen by design as fairly simplistic. I'll go into further detail shortly as to how party dynamics can help strengthen tropes, but before we touch on that, I'll discuss the former archetype, the voiceless protagonist. One recurrent trope of JRPGs that feels archaic is the silent main character. Now, this design choice has been a staple of RPGs and JRPGs in general for decades. It has been iconised as a way in which to allow the player to feel like they are the main character. This concept in of itself isn't a bad thing. In fact, especially during a time where designer creativity was held back by the technology they had, this concept helped add self-lore elements to these games. The issue I've found in my experience is, technology has evolved, but the concept in JRPGs hasn't altogether changed as much. Again, please recognise that I'm speaking as a new fan, and I'm sure this isn't the case across the board. Let's use Dragon Quest XI to stress the point I'm about to make. Voiceless protagonist, whilst not a personal preference of mine, I prefer Mass Effect's approach of a voice blank slate which you can mould, I nevertheless understand the appeal of. The problem I found in Dragon Quest XI, as well as Astral Chain for that matter, was that your character, whilst a blank slate in the sense they have little personality at the beginning, cannot be moulded anywhere near the extent to which would suffice for me to be able to feel like I'm in any way this person. I can name them, change the weapon type and skills they have, as well as the outfits they wear, and that's about it. The character's fundamental appearance is preset, and personally I'm not one of the fortunate minority who looks anywhere close to this dude. This is a strange and frustrating decision. We know that there is technology now vastly customise your characters further. Take any Bethesda game, and they were doing this stuff well over a decade ago. But here the game seems stuck to have taken the paradoxical choice to give you a developed character insofar as appearance and backstory, but remove any personality. They haven't committed to one system or another. You don't have a fully developed lead, like Geralt, who you mould through narrative choices, amazing hair and beard styles. Nor do you have the opposite end of the spectrum, where you create a character from scratch and in your own likeness, with your own backstory and personality. Instead you are left with this husk, stuck in limbo, who neither serves as a developed lead or as a genuine you are the hero insert. Why? They managed to provide a full party that you can control that has fully developed and genuinely likeable personalities. Then you just stand there, as deadpan as can be, as if your voice box was replaced with long brown hair and this perpetual dirt face. To cope with this, I had to resort to my own headcanon, which argued that your character was a true modern stoic, who swore an oath of silence to show everyone how in line with his emotions he is. Yeah, I shouldn't have to do this in the 21st century. Similarly, Astral Chain elects for this equally bizarre design choice, and whilst the customization of your character has a bit more variety in its hairstyles and complexion, it again feels odd. I gave JRPGs high praise earlier for having a strong sense of identity, and so it feels weird to then often choose to elect for a voiceless protagonist, and not then enable you to have expansive choice, whether it be in dialogue or customization. Instead, you just end up with this weird, awkward, voiceless Mong. Okay. Whew, that last bit was unnecessary. I think this is a fair point. Just listen to a few of these scenes and try to tell me if they wouldn't have been better with a voice actor.
We're alive. But how? That great big flash of lightning. It was almost like you made it happen. Look! The mark on your hand! Huh? Oh, it stopped. Well, we can worry about that later. All I know is that you saved me yet again. I don't know what I'd do without you. Now, we really had better be finishing up this ceremony. Look at all this fog. Is this normal, do you think?
Help! Help me!
What? Cole? Quick! You have to help him!
On the other hand, when these tropes are used correctly and even subverted, JRPGs provide some incredibly strong character interactions that can surpass many other games and genres. I'll use Tales of Vesperia as a case study here. I think I've just about reached the limit of referencing Xenoblade Chronicles 2 before I have to retitle this video. Tales of Vesperia is a game that stylistically features a lot of tropes, including some of which I have criticised. Character design again seems to have a bias against anyone north of about 20 years old, and at first glance is easy to make certain assumptions about. Oh boy, this game showed me that tropes are important, and when they are used to subvert player expectations, it can lead to some very interesting storytelling. Considering I just vented about some issues I had with lead characters in JRPGs, why don't we talk about Vesperia's, and what a tremendous job they do of creating an interesting lead who feels incongruous to the tropes the genre has foregrounded. Yuri Lowell isn't your typical lead character for a JRPG. Yuri in many ways is the complete opposite of Rex or Dragon Quest XI's hero. He is sarcastic, cynical and jaded by past experiences. He has a very clearly defined personality, best befitting the anti-hero archetype. He makes choices that are questionable. He has a means to an end mentality and is willing to use violence to solve issues for the greater good. Now, this archetype isn't uncommon in JRPGs, but normally it is not set on the lead character. Tales of Vesperia almost inverts the usual party dynamics. In fact, a typical JRPG lead would be someone like Flynn, a heroic knight bound by duty and justice. When contrasted to Yuri, this creates a genuinely interesting, at times tense dynamic, which adds to later narrative twists and makes you question every character's true nature. This is just one example, but it helped me realise that tropes can also be incredibly useful to storytelling. I hope as I go on to play more JRPGs, that this subversion of expectations and diversification of tropes is more common. This would go a long way into making these characters feel more mature, more like real people. JRPGs are more often than not built upon the foundation of a great journey or adventure. One element crucial to making this adventure feel memorable in between, and even in the gameplay, is the party dynamic. Having the opportunity to play as a number of different characters both personality and gameplay wise is a real strength of this genre. The tropes I've spoken about can either hinder or enhance this experience, and the party mechanic used often in JRPGs is integral to this. One of the greatest joys I have gotten from these games is recruiting new party members, and then seeing how they change and develop the dynamic in place, how they contrast and help examine different points of view, and ultimately the growth they experience throughout the story and gameplay. By the end, I felt that I was truly part of the journey, in spite of sometimes not having as much involvement as the lead as I would like. These characters felt like real people, friends with their own subplots and interpersonal relationships, and this was the main hook that kept me going during these admittedly very long games. One mechanic I found particularly helped with developing the party was optional conversations and events that can occur, but serve simply to provide little bits of development interspersed throughout the overarching story. In Tales of Vesperia, there is something called skits, which are essentially optional bits of party chatter that occur as the story progresses. These skits help reflect the different dynamics forming between the characters. They offer moments of reflection, characters after big events, moments of humour, and even react to the different things you do. I won't say any more on that one. Here is one I particularly enjoyed early on.
Will this forest really get us to the other side of the hold?
If it doesn't, we'll just come back.
But what if I get turned into a frog or a snake by the forest's curse?
If that happens, I'll take care of you.
You'll take care of me?
Of course I would. Don't worry. I had pet frogs and snakes when I was a kid.
If you got turned into a frog or a snake, Yuri, I wouldn't have any idea what to feed you.
Along a similar line in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, they also have a similar feature, the heart-to-heart mechanic. Similarly to Tales, this feature is for the most part optional, and again features skit-like cutscenes that exist to show the characters' bond. They can also serve to start or further quests, and generally are a welcome, wholesome feature that shows the tropes in a positive manner. Here is a quick example.
What's this? Ah! That more than enough fiddling! Don't handle Tora's stuff!
What's this? It's all fluffy. Is this a bunnet costume? Doesn't look very scientific.
That armor for Poppy!
Armor. It's got ears and everything.
This won't provide protection. It's more like something from a beauty pageant.
This cutie bun armor!
Cutie bun armor?
Correct! This state-of-the-art armor. Everyone wished they had such good defense. Additional function is to cheer up Master Pawn with extreme cuteness.
It looks like that's its primary function.
Cheer up effect can be boosted by initiating tail wiggle dance protocol.
Tora, I think you have a little explaining to do here.
Both these iterations of features also aid in helping to ground these games, giving time for the player to see the characters take in all the crazy events that happen to them, humanise the characters and build further bonds between the party. As you can see, tropes are a fundamental aspect of JRPGs. This is something I wouldn't dare suggest be changed. However, it's important that when designing these games, that the designers carefully choose which tropes to use, and not use, not for the sake of fan service, but rather to support the story and gameplay. When tropes are used correctly, it can lead to some incredibly interesting narrative beats and character relationships, but when lent too far into, can be off-putting and lead to some poor design and characterization. And of course, general annoyance. There are countless tropes that I haven't discussed, some fantastic whilst others frustrating, but nevertheless, they are a defining aspect that helps make up the complexion of what a JRPG is, and that is okay. And that is only edition 1 of this series. Well, it is fair to say that JRPGs are outlandish, exuberant, and just about every superlative under the sun. They certainly have aspects I find myself having to put up with, but in doing so I get to experience some of the best gameplay and characterization I have seen in gaming. I hope this critique gave an insight into the thoughts of a relative newcomer to this genre, to now an unwavering fan who will champion the genre and place his banner wherever he can. But, as with any form of art, it is important to critique, to reflect and to consider how we can improve upon it. The fact is, I have a bias. I need more players from the West to play these games. I want better, quicker localization, and releases for these amazing games, and so I need more Westerners to come to appreciate this fantastic genre. If you can survive the 10-hour rule, grow to love the tropiest of tropes, and appreciate the abstractness and intent of the character designs, you might just discover a genre that is more diverse than one critique could even possibly attempt to uncover. Thank you all for tuning in. Down below I'd like to create a forum for people to discuss, without spoilers, some things they love, and some things they love just a little bit less about this genre. Recommend a game. I know I am eager to delve even further in, and I look forward to coming back again with an even broader perspective for edition 2. My name is Michael JH, and this has been the Gaming Conversation. Peace.